Mitchell Stankovic Associates and the Underground Ideas into Action presents The Underground Chats, authentic conversations with credit union thought leaders. Today's chat, the good, bad, and ugly of 2021, with Frank Diekmann, Collaborator-in-Chief with CUToday.info.
Hello, Frank. How are you?
Good afternoon. Doing very well. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I'm excited to talk to you about what's taken place over the last year and where we're going in 2021. But let's start with kind of the good, the bad, and the really ugly from 2020. What are your observations?
Well, certainly in terms of the good, you just cannot avoid talking about the pandemic. And you see in the good what credit unions have done for their members and for their communities over the last 10 months. The trade associations have certainly compiled all the PPP numbers and the emergency loans and some of the other steps. Well, what is less well known and frankly will never be documented is really, though, some of the good, the small things that credit unions have done in their offices and with their branches to help out members. Those stories that'll never really be told, but they're just the small things that are the difference between someone, keeping the rent in the place they live and perhaps being evicted. So that's the overarching good that many credit unions have done. Secondly, you would certainly have to look at the good work they've done maintaining most of their employment and their staffing levels. Been very easy to, especially if you're a for-profit, to simply say, look, branch staff, we don't need you. We're furloughing you. Good luck. Here's how you fill out an unemployment form. But for the most part, credit unions have been able to maintain staffing levels by redeploying people. So that's certainly a positive. And I think the final good is that some of that has been recognized nationally, although there's been so much competing news, it's difficult to really differentiate that. In terms of the bad, I think there's probably that credit unions that don't understand how the pandemic has permanently changed the way financial services are going to be delivered to members and the way that consumers expect to get those services delivered to them. There's, just about everything else, or like everyone else, I've ordered something on Amazon over the holidays, and really it was almost laughably easy, just how smooth the process was. In fact, we talked about pain points and friction. The only real friction seems to come when you realize what it is you've bought and that you have to pay for it. And that's the expectation the member now has. And, certainly if your electronic services don't deliver that way, members are going to be disappointed and may look elsewhere. Boards that don't recognize that, I think, are part of the bad. The ugly, and I'm sorry to say it, but there is some ugly in 2020 for credit unions, and I think it's where the focus needs to be. And that is that the data show that in the last 9 months of 2020, credit unions every credit union in asset category under $1 billion lost money, lost members, and lost loans, which will ultimately lead to losing money. So credit unions are stagnant or losing money and loans in every asset category below $1 billion in assets. And that really deserves more attention than I think it's got. We've certainly worked to provide attention to it, focus a light on it. We continue to focus a light on it. But this lack of growth and what is basically 80%, 85% of all credit unions is a really significant issue that needs to be dealt with. You wonder really how many credit unions are acting to do something about that. You hate to think that they're just assuming, well, when the pandemic's over, this trend line will cease. And I don't think that is the case. And it's a real disservice to members if you're not addressing it. And that includes boards. I really am concerned that a lot of boards don't seem to recognize this ugly trend line. So if management is just proceeding along as if all else fails, we'll merge, that's a real disservice to the membership, as well as there's plenty of research and data that show that just because you joined a larger credit union doesn't mean they have better rates or lower fees, etc. A second thing that I think occurred during 2020 that's quite ugly, Sue, is that credit unions finished behind banks again in terms of perceptions of customer service and how satisfied consumers are with their financial institution and the American Customer Service Index that's conducted by the University of Michigan. So that's really troubling. And then I think the third piece of that, which is related, that I find quite ugly, is the response from the trade association, which has basically been crickets. There's been no response. Hey, everything's good here. Move along, nothing to look at, nothing to see. There's plenty to look at, and there's plenty to see. And I regret to say that doesn't seem to be really anyone taking the leadership in addressing that this ugliness.
I think that those are very interesting points, and I'm wondering how much of it's related to the virtual world. When you're talking about the losing loans and the fact that service is down, I mean, the whole idea that I need to have a seamless experience, as you've indicated, is really critical during this time. And there's so many alternatives to being able to get the money or to check the competitive rates. And your point about it's not going away is one that, to me, is the most pressing, if you will, and that incorporates the idea of the trade associations, the leadership overall, is that are we going to just see an industry that's resigned to decline? You know, we're seeing fewer resources put into our credit unions. And frankly, we had such deposit growth that earnings are down to the point where net worth is going to start to be a real issue. And the question comes, you know, at what point does NCUA come back and say, wait a minute, this isn't going to, you know, this is not going to be sustainable. So we'll start to see a reaction there as well. I see the implications of those things that you tied, if you will, tied it together, because I think that's affecting service. I think that's affecting the overall relationship that the members have with their credit union.
Well, I think you raise a really good point. In that American Customer Service Index survey that's conducted by the University of Michigan, credit unions actually trailed banks even further when it came to electronic services. And banks have invested billions of dollars into those channels. And, you know, we talk a lot when people talk about consumers, we talk about this K-shaped recovery. We're getting a K-shaped trend line, if you will, within credit unions. And that is, you have the credit unions over $1 billion and you have those under $1 billion, and they're headed in separate directions very often. Of course, there's individual exceptions. And, you know, what probably, especially among smaller credit unions, needs to be recognized is that you're no longer a physical entity in terms of with an electronic channel. You're basically an electronic channel backed up by a physical entity. And it's a flip-flop that you really need to recognize, that a credit union really needs to recognize that people don't want to come and see you unless they really need something. And it's a real change for, you know, a lot of mindsets. And, you know, we hear this word throughout 2020 with so many businesses, and that word is pivot. And we'll find out who the successful were at pivoting in 2020. They ideally have pivoted already, but we'll see how successful many are. And those that aren't prepared to pivot are unfortunately probably prepared to merge or just slowly die away, as you mentioned.
Well, and I think that we've got to modernize the board, you know, practices, business practices, expertise, knowledge, because how do we react? I mean, we are reacting rather than proactively establishing a game plan.
Well, there's an irony here, which you just mentioned, which is the board is most likely meeting virtually, and they may never meet in person again. If you don't recognize right there what a big change that is, and you got firsthand experience, then you're simply out of touch with the market.
We, this year for strategic planning sessions, really put together very engaging virtual planning sessions and we talked about strategic governance on a virtual level, and here are the rules, here are the facts. And it was very interesting to see people have to make sure that their cameras were on, make sure that they, you know, they were engaged, and we watched visually. And I really do believe that we're going to have to put more rules around our due diligence, because it's, you know, it's hard enough to get people to read the packets and and come together on a monthly basis. So these are critical times, and I'm optimistic from the social purpose standpoint, because I do believe we have a differentiator right now that is so critical to our consumer wellness. But I also want to make sure that we can deploy it. And without the right, you know, asset mix, without net income, it's going to be difficult to do that investment.
That is correct. And you've talked you've hosted, and I've certainly enjoyed the underground collisions that have taken place. This is one of those collisions. There's a collision taking place right now. It's kind of a slow motion collision in terms of the pivot that is taking place. And like we said, with the way people expect to be served, and then the opportunities and the need to serve them. So that collision is taking place. And like so many collisions, who walks away from it and who survives will really come down to preparedness in the end.
Yeah. Well, as we take a look at the networking exchange and regarding the vaccine, you and I briefly exchanged there regarding the vaccine point about conferences. You raised the point about people conferences required to have verification to have vaccinated and verification. Looking at that when it comes to travel. We're certainly looking at that when it comes to travel for our credit union industry. Done a lot of travel. What do you think the tone's going to be going forward? What do you think the tone's going to be going forward? Head in the sand and just say, open your eyes. Head in the sand and just say, open your eyes. That says everything's rosy. Or world that says everything's rosy. Or are we going to dig deeper and get involved?
Well, you're speaking in terms of just meetings and conferences first and foremost. That may be dictated by the insurance that a meeting or conference host has in place for the conference. And that is, what is your liability on vaccinated versus unvaccinated people? I understand how much credit union people like to get together. I certainly, having been to some 550 credit union meetings, enjoy getting together with people. But so an overlooked issue, there may be liability and whether, moving forward, whether or not you can get insurance for a conference. And I know that we've done some reporting on one CEO who is adamant that they will not require vaccinating for their own staff members, and that's their individual position. We've also talked to some others who are adamant that they would. So that debate is happening in real time. Could come down to the courts, I hate to say, so often it does, but that's one thing that'll need to be thought about.
I hadn't thought about the idea that insurance may dictate it. Makes sense when you look at the super spreaders and some of the things we've seen in 2020. When they talked about Boston earlier in the year, I was very much thinking about our last time in DC and the record attendance and the number of us that were all together. So fascinating. There's so much complexity.
You don't want your conference remembered as the people helping people catch COVID event. And that's probably what will be, people are going to be cautious about.
Okay, so as we look to quantify goodwill in the future, one of the things for me that has been a point that I've been making, and then our friend Mark from Australia talked about when they lost their tax exemption. Much of it was due to the fact that they weren't able to quantify what their social impact was in real numbers. And so we've been talking with our credit unions about really establishing a way to monitor goodwill. And so I was just curious if you had ideas around balance sheet metrics that we should be looking at as we go forward.
Oh, the irony of this challenge is that goodwill is the foundation of the credit union business model, and yet you can't really find it on the spreadsheet or on a 5300 form. And as you noted, it has to be documented. The best way to do that, and I think the trade groups do a decent job of this, is capturing some of the pricing advantages that credit unions deliver back into a community. How that we're really trying to answer what's the ROI on the tax exemption. And as long as credit unions can show that, and I think perhaps having learned a lesson from Australia, as you mentioned, and I've interviewed, I recall being there 20 years ago and talking to credit unions at that point when they had kind of realized, look what we've lost. The one thing about the tax exemption, a point I've made before, is it's not a financial metric. It's really a state of mind metric. That is, what the tax exemption does for credit unions is force them to think about themselves as being different. And what are we doing that makes us different from banks? It's a constant reminder of where the point of differentiation is from for-profit institutions. That's what the tax exemption's real function is to always be in the back of the minds of credit union people. Are we earning this exemption, and can we prove it? And as we've seen, there are increasing challenges. The banking industry has launched a full campaign, as they have many times before, challenging that exemption. So the issue of goodwill really requires a sort of you need to be able to track what it is that where the advantages are, the pricing advantages are that you provide in your community to other lenders, to other savings institutions, and not just in your community anymore, but now against internet-based institutions, virtual institutions as well. So goodwill is it's challenging to prove, but credit unions should welcome that challenge, because if you can't defend it, then you don't deserve the tax exemption.
I agree. I also think that storytelling is part of it. And I know we all want to tell our story, and there's a lot of encouragement to get the members to tell their stories. But I've often heard, as we have gone through the transition in the last 5 years, where we have more of an economic perspective to social purpose, that we have to tell the warm and fuzzies, but we also have to equate that to why it's good business. So, you know, doing the right thing's good business because of these factors. And I look at it from a volunteer standpoint. When you have your own company, as you know, we have to justify how we spend our time. And so we spend a great deal of time volunteering. I look at that from the standpoint of that's what I want to do. It's part of my core purpose, right? It's from a company standpoint. But I also recognize that it has to be good business for us too, that we have to manage our time and be able to quantify what we're doing and the impact that we're having. So that's why metrics have always been important to me. So I think it really comes down, like you said, to the state of mind that says, let's make sure that we are tracking what this looks like, volunteer hours, in addition to, as you said, you know, the hard numbers in terms of pricing and things like that. And I think as we go forward, we're going to see more of it. I think we're going to see more of corporate citizenship, although that's irony in and of itself, given the day we're on. But I think that it's a very an interesting time for this country, and in terms of how we're going to step up and who could drive that. And I really believe credit unions could be one of the answers. So hopefully, hope is not a strategy. So let's consider it just to move forward. So of all the virtual conferences this year, and there's been a ton, and we don't call it pivot anymore. We call it shift happens. What did you find about the virtual conferences that you enjoyed? What do you think that we could do better?
I can't say that I attended every virtual conference that has taken place since March, but I certainly have attended or sat in on or listened to a fair number of them. And we've really seen, we talked about how credit unions have jammed 10 years worth of learning into 10 months. I would say that credit union meeting hosts, companies such as your own and others, have jammed 10 years worth of lessons in how to produce a virtual conference into 10 months. There's really been a big change in an evolution is probably a better word, an evolution in what we saw in the way credit union conferences and meetings and webinars took place from March through December. In March, you really saw just people scrambling, trying to take a physical event, kind of jam it online and get it online, and just almost as if it was the same event, but you're just watching it on a video monitor and trying to conduct it in the same way. By December, we've seen, or really earlier than that, we've seen much smoother operations. We've seen credit unions really get better at putting on these presentations, because it's interesting. It's much more easy to be distracted in a virtual environment. You know that people watching a virtual meeting are doing other things while they are, quote unquote, attending your virtual meeting. So what credit unions have gotten better at is they've really gotten better at not just the meeting content, how it's presented, moving, for instance, from live presentations to more pre-recorded events, because we saw these glitches early on. You know, somebody's frozen. Can you hear me? We've lost you, that sort of stuff, which was amusing at first, kind of aggravating, though, overall for both the host and the attendees. That took place. We've seen a much better production values on meetings. People expect to see in a credit union event the same production values that they're seeing elsewhere. And so I think, I know CUNA Mutual's Discovery meeting, the Think Conference by Co-op, Catalyst Corporate's virtual meeting earlier this year offered some really good takeaways. The California League, Nevada League, REACH Conference. Your event, the Underground Collision, was virtual, was very well produced, well done. You were interacting with some animated characters. That was entertaining, and you have to be entertaining in this event. So that's certainly the change that we've seen, and I think we'll see moving forward. And that is, if you want people to tune in, it's not just you can get away with bad content if you're at a nice location. And we've all been in the meetings where we know we were there because of the location. But you can't get away with bad content when the location is someone's home office, because they've got other things to do, and it's, they want you to take them away from where they are. So I think that's the big lesson we saw this year, and we'll see moving forward. And that's going to, not to get too far out there, Sue, but as people start working more in virtual reality headsets and augmented reality, that's only going to get better. And, it's going to feel like you're there. And you might feel like, well, that's way out there. No, it's not. It's almost here, and it's going to change things again. And credit union presenters need to be prepared for that as well.
I think that what we've seen this year is also attention spans, as you indicated, that we literally, okay, it was great because we could see each other and we could do all that. Then we went to, oh, we can't. It's going to have to be produced in a different way. And so now we've got to break up the content. We've got to do chunks of information. I've found myself now having less and less of an attention span with it too. But the life shelf of the production continues, so you can stop and then go back to it, which I think is going to be helpful. Certainly was with the underground, where we went from a few hundred people to thousands of people going and viewing and being part of it. It's also changed the way that we present the content, because you're looking at an audience now that is peering inside of things. I love the idea of the virtual, and I think that the dynamic that we're going to deal with in 2021 is the combination of pre-recording with live, and that mix that allows us to feel like it's dynamic, but also gives us that, that content. So it's an evolution.
Well, the one thing you do get in a virtual environment, Sue, is you get better Q&A. I've noticed, I host a lot of meetings. I guess I MC a lot of meetings. I guess there's just nobody else available. But you get much better questions than you do at live events. I mean, sometimes live credit union people are never hesitant about asking questions, but there seems to be a little bit more give and take there.
It's true. And I think that we have a chance to kind of, if you will, think it through as we're putting it into chat or we're engaging. So that's great. So we're looking for big ideas that, this year there was, unfortunately we went through a lot of painful experiences. We are seeing new initiatives as a result of that with our African American Confederation, with our DEI initiatives. When you look and tackle those issues, what do you see, coming up? I mean, I talked this morning a little bit about the divide politically, not just from the standpoint of what's going on right now, but the idea that how do we come back? What's the path to more of a unified society? And I was just curious what you think the big issues are going to be in 2021.
I think there are numerous big issues in 2021. I'll start, and these are in no particular order, but I will start with the one you just mentioned, which is the DEI. The big question, I think, in 2021 and 2022 will be, will there be follow through on all the initiatives and interests that we saw, certainly in the wake of the death of George Floyd and others, when there was a lot of strong feedback, strong support within credit unions for launching these initiatives. But a lot of times they're a lot like New Year's Eve, New Year's resolutions. We certainly meant it when we said it, but some other things have taken place. And we get distracted. So whether or not there's follow through on DEI in the years ahead will be interesting to watch, and whether we see greater African American participation in credit union management, which, let's face it, most of them look like an old Boston Celtics team. They're pretty much white when you go to most credit union meetings. So will we see greater diversity as that goes forward, and we see execution on that? Big issue in 2021, we touched on a little bit earlier too, is this evolving concept of field of membership. Not a lot of attention's been paid to it, but the NCUA board recently proposed changes in what counts as a service location, as a service area for a credit union. Can it be an ATM? Can it be just electronic access and locale and environment? are becoming far less important than they used to be. So that proposal from N2A is certainly worth watching. And then the come back to the issue I mentioned earlier, which is the ugly issue, as we described it, of the bifurcated growth that is taking place in credit unions. I think that really deserves more attention than it's getting, and it's not just a 2021 issue, it's a survival issue moving through the decades ahead. And I think that really is critical and it's going to deserve much more focus than it's getting. And it may be up to collaborate. It may require collaboration among cooperatives or cooperation among cooperatives, which we hear a lot of talk about, much like DEI, and we don't see very often. It may be that the leadership to help smaller credit unions grow isn't going to come from the top, and they're going to have to pull themselves up together.
You've often reinforced with me that you want to hear different voices, and you're encouraging people to write and to express their thoughts and to bring you information. And I find it fascinating that we put that out to the industry, we put that out to people, and it takes time for them to sit down and to express themselves or put together those thoughts or to go on record with them. And what I've always enjoyed about you, Frank, is that not only will you go on record with it, but you'll publish it, and you're able to capture the insights as they're happening. And I think it's a talent, and it's something that not to be taken for granted, but it's inspiring to all of us. And I just want you to say that from a DEI standpoint, we launched the collective this year, and Mitchell Stankovic is now going to be part of that. And the See Your Pride is definitely going to have a bigger voice, and some of the ideas into action that we feel, they have to result in momentum. And so back to what I said earlier, if we're going to spend our time and volunteer, I've got to see results. I've got to be part of solutions that we're putting out there. So I'm going to be very interested in seeing those results as well. And I think the challenge to our industry is going to be really collectively, how do these credit unions that are under $1 billion, how do they collaborate? Because like you said, the $1 billion plus, there's potential ways for them to do it in an easier fashion. So. Ideas into action. Anything specific that you would say to me or to our audience that you think we should move forward on?
I would say on the last point that you just mentioned that I had also addressed, and that is that it comes to, I've been giving some thought to different ways that we at CU Today, that I might be able to play a role in bringing different people together. I've already had a few people reach out and say, if we're not seeing leadership on this issue of how can we turn things around at smaller institutions, then let's take that leadership ourselves. Let's pick that mantle up ourselves. And so I am looking at ways I might be able to play a role, how I can help others to move that forward. And I would welcome input from people or anyone really at any time on that issue.
I think that's great. So we will we'll put that out there, and mark your calendar. March 1st, we'll be putting the next underground together, but we'll be recapping this one and sending you, because we'd like to get the word out as soon as possible with your thoughts for 2021. So I appreciate you. You're very important.